welcome back to my channel. So, unless you've been living under a rock, then you have probably heard of this HBO show called The Idol, created by Sam Levinson and Abel Tesfaye, aka The Weeknd. And if you haven't, don't worry, here's a rundown. The rundown does contain spoilers. The Idol is a limited series that follows the story of Jocelyn, played by Lily Rose Depp, who is a pop star that's trying to make her grand return to the limelight and music and touring after going on a hiatus following a mental breakdown she had due to her mother's passing. While working on her comeback, Jocelyn meets the club owner Tedros, played by The Weeknd, and the two of them develop a weird, intimate, and creative relationship as Tedros pushes Jocelyn to her limits physically and mentally to help her reach her creative potential. But Tedros isn't just an innocent club owner wanting to help a struggling pop star. He is a sadistic, cult leader-esque rat man, and as he starts to intertwine himself more into Jocelyn's life and starts to control it and the people around her, things start to get more tense and drastic and escalate until Jocelyn reveals that she has just been using him for inspiration, but now that she has used him to create the album that they've been working on, she dumps him and he is removed from her life. However, in the final scene of the final episode, Jocelyn actually invites Tedros to one of her concerts, like before the show. She gives him like an artist pass and they reunite, and it's revealed that she was lying about certain things that I'll talk about in my actual breakdown of the show. And it ends with Jocelyn kind of keeping Tedros as a pet to use for inspiration, and so the twist is like, whoa, she's actually the manipulative and bad person. The end. That's The Idol. There's some drama surrounding this show because originally it had a different director, a woman named Amy Seimetz. We don't know much about the behind the scenes of this show, but from what we do know, the project when Amy was directing was actually about 80% finished, and it goes in a very different direction than the finished product that we watched. But for reasons unknown, Amy left the project and Sam Levinson and The Weeknd essentially rewrote the entire thing into what we saw. There was an allegation that the reason Sam and Abel took over is because, according to Abel, the show was being led with too much of a female perspective. I will say take that with a grain of salt because I couldn't actually find the source of this claim, so I don't know if this is something The Weeknd actually said, but I will say based on how the show turned out under Sam and Abel's guidance, I am inclined to believe that he did say that. The show was actually under some scrutiny before it even aired because some articles had come out about things that Sam Levinson was trying to include in the show that were controversial because a lot of it was creeping more towards like torture, P-O-R-N, just for the sake of it, and there were some things that had to be scrapped simply because Lily Rose Depp couldn't physically do them. And The Weeknd's response to these articles didn't make the scrutiny any better or lesser, because in response to one of the bigger exposés, which was published by the Rolling Stone, Abel took to Twitter to post a scene from the show that it wasn't even in the show. It was just something they filmed really quickly to try and clap back at Rolling Stone, where Tedros and Jocelyn are just kind of like, we don't want to do an article with the Rolling Stone. They're like irrelevant. If there's anyone that's winning the I don't give a fuck war, it is not Abel Tesfaye. In fact, he would lose so pathetically that he actually isn't even allowed to be drafted or join the I don't give a fuck military because that's how extremely he loses the I don't give a fuck war. But back on topic, a lot of people were not looking forward to The Idol because of the drama around it, and when it aired, those who did turn in took to Twitter and other parts of the internet, I assume, to share how unimpressed they were with the first episode. And I was one of them. I knew I was going to be talking about The Idol for a video even before like a lot of the controversy started. So I did watch the first episode the night it aired, and I can confirm and I will explain later why I didn't like it, but I didn't actually watch the rest of the episodes, at least as they aired, but I did see highlights on Twitter as they came out of like the worst moments, so I was able to keep in the loop. But the other day, I sat in one sitting and I watched the 4 remaining episodes, which is episodes 2 through 5, and I have now come to you with my 18 pages of critiques and like 2 sentences of compliments. This is The Idol. But first, a quick little fun fact brought to you by the Better Internet Initiative. Fun fact, the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into being on July 26th, 1990, and so because of that, every July is actually Disability Pride Month. The ADA helps protect the civil rights of those with disabilities by requiring employers and public spaces to meet basic accommodations for disabled people, such as wheelchair ramps and the allowance of service animals into establishments. It's a very important act impact that help to make changes that you might not even notice, but make a big difference for disabled people. And that's not just a little number of people. In the United States alone, 1 in 4 adults, according to the CDC, have a disability that impacts their major life actions such as employment and education. That is 61 million people personally affected by having a disability. And while it's important to recognize and accommodate for these disabilities, it's also important to recognize the person with the disability and see them as a complete person, and try not to look at disabilities as this innately negative thing. Yes, having a disability can add challenges to someone's life, and it's important to, again, recognize that and stand in solidarity. But unfortunately, there is the tendency to view someone that has a disability as someone that is, I guess, damaged goods, or someone that needs to be coddled, or someone that's a burden because they can't, do all the things that you can do maybe. And for Disability Pride Month, I want y'all to try and challenge those ideas either within yourself or if you see them out in the world, because there are so many disabled people that live long, happy, and satisfied lives regardless of their disability. And based on their words and experiences, a lot of allyship from able-bodied people doesn't fully feel like allyship because of this overwhelmingly negative association with the idea of being disabled. So for Pride Disability Month this month, try to break that stigma and focus more on visibility, education, and inclusivity. And that's all I wanted to say, so now we can get back into the video. Also, I will say, I don't know if I'm going to be able to include clips from the show because HBO is one of those streaming services that does the blocking thing whenever you have to screen record it. I'll try to find things. I don't know. Sorry. But also some of the things I talk about, if not most of the things I talk about, I think I wouldn't even be able to show, so there is that. From episode 1, I knew that this was going to be a bit of a mess, and not even after the end of the episode, I mean pretty early on in the first ever episode. Episode 1 centers around Jocelyn preparing for her comeback, and she's taking pictures for promo or an album cover or something. We actually never find out what she's taking those pictures for. She's doing dance practice for a music video, and she's doing an interview with Vanity Fair. There are a few conflicts in this episode. None of them are handled well, in my opinion. Firstly, there's the conflict between a man on Jocelyn's team named Haim, who even at this point, I don't know what his job title was. He's just there and has a lot of money, and it's between him and the intimacy coordinator who was brought on to the shoot because Jocelyn is wearing nothing but a silk robe. If you don't know, intimacy coordinators are people who are brought onto sets where a star or stars are doing something involving nudity, sex, intimacy, etc., and they're basically there just to help plan the scene, make sure the people involved are comfortable and consenting, making sure they're not being asked by anyone on the crew to do something that wasn't previously agreed upon or something they're not comfortable with, etc. It's a very important job, and a lot of the times when you hear about inappropriate things happening on sets, find that an intimacy coordinator wasn't involved. For example, Game of Thrones didn't have an intimacy coordinator despite how many not safe for work scenes there are in the show, and the stories that came out about the treatment of certain actresses on the show, like Emilia Clarke, who plays Daenerys, shows exactly why they needed an intimacy coordinator, and it's also the reason why the prequel show House of the Dragon does have an intimacy coordinator. But back to The Idol, one of the first conflicts we see in the show is between the previously mentioned intimacy coordinator and previously mentioned guy named Haim, because the intimacy coordinator is literally just doing his job and saying hey, she can't be fully undressed. It's not in the pre-made agreement. I don't remember the proper term for it, but it's a pre-made agreement, and it's totally fine if she wants to be topless, but we would need to just postpone the shoot maybe a day until we get the right clearance and stuff for everyone on the set. And Haim doesn't like this intimacy coordinator getting in the way and telling him that they have to stop the photo shoot because it's already going on and he doesn't want to pay another day. So he tricks the intimacy coordinator and locks him in a bathroom. The issue with this, in my opinion, yes, all of this is my opinion, is for one, the intimacy coordinator himself is written more like a parody of an intimacy coordinator. He's measly, he's being portrayed as annoying and over the top, almost the soy boy stereotype. He's kind of like that, and it doesn't make sense. The only way I could see this scene even having a point would be to show that the people around Jocelyn are kind of crooked and care more about money than our safety. And while that is true to some extent, you didn't need to make a mockery of the intimacy coordinator in order to show corruption of Hollywood execs or whatever. But it also doesn't even make sense sense if that was supposed to be an example of like corruption of those working for and with Jocelyn, because the character Chaim, the guy who locks the intimacy coordinator in the bathroom, goes on to be revealed as like really a father figure kind of to Jocelyn. He cares about her and her image a lot. We find out that he's actually been paying for half of her mortgage, I believe, since her mom died like a year prior. So it doesn't really make sense to start the show with him kind of seeming in one direction and then taking him completely in another, and like for no real purpose too. He's a side character. This leads into one of the biggest issues with The Idol, which is inconsistency in the writing, and especially in like the interpersonal relationships of the show. And this becomes clear the more you get into the show, because as it goes on, the writing honestly gets worse. Like episodes 4 and 5 are so messy and genuinely some of the worst TV I've seen in like a while. But speaking of inconsistency, let's talk about the two other conflicts within episode 1, which are the picture and the song. A picture leaks of Jocelyn with some male bodily fluids on her face. The second main dilemma being the fact that, as it turns out, Jocelyn doesn't even like the song that she's making her comeback with, and she doesn't want to use it. But the way Jocelyn's written and how she responds to these issues shows how inconsistent and weak the writing of the show is. The picture is never really addressed in a realistic way. When Jocelyn finds out about it, we don't really see an authentic reaction because she's surrounded by her team and presumably doesn't want to freak out in front of them. So she says it could be worse, which, while true, is not the reaction that someone gives when they're like happy about something, but we never get to see her genuinely upset about it. And while we do actually see her coming back to the photo later on in a future episode, it's still such a muted reaction. She doesn't confide in her close friend and assistant Leia, and in fact the only time she really talks about it again is when she's telling The Weeknd and Troye Sivan's characters that she doesn't want it to be the cover of her like comeback album as they suggest. And it's just not like real. That's a huge issue that I take with Jocelyn in the way that she's written, is that she never feels like a believable character or person to me. Her only personality trait is that she wants to be a famous, nasty main pop girl, which like good for her, but she lacks a lot of depth, and the choices she makes, as well as her true personality that's revealed later on, comes with no explanation that, if provided, probably would have aided in her characterization and engaged the audience more. If there had been a few short throwback scenes that showed Jocelyn's upbringing, her rise to fame, her relationship with her mother, who is a huge source of conflict in the show, especially later on, it would have added so much to Jocelyn's character, and it might have even made the twist of Jocelyn being this like lying manipulator make more sense, or maybe even give impact. And I don't mean to say give more impact, I mean just give impact in general. But we don't get that, obviously. Instead, we get this deadpan, depth-lacking main character whose motivations go between non-existent and, again, inconsistent, with not much in between. For example, going back to what I said about her not liking the song, it doesn't really make sense for her to recognize that the song is a corny cash grab and wanting to change it because it doesn't feel authentic to her, which we find out as she is confiding in Leia. But she isn't able to also recognize the equally phony parts of her life, and the parts of her life and those that surround her, like the record and the tour people who are telling her the song is amazing and they love it so much and it's perfect for her. Or The Weeknd's character in his entirety, at least until the very end of the series. It's implied that we're like supposed to believe that she knew everything from the start and that she was manipulating from the start. She wasn't. I'm not even going to expand on that. She simply wasn't. But I'm going to talk about the twist more later. But still, speaking on the song, it also doesn't make sense that she's worried about people making fun of her for the song while almost being entirely dismissive of the photo. And while I can see that like maybe she doesn't care as much about the photo because it's already been public, but that's a conclusion I'm making to fill in a gap, not something that I have been led to believe because of the show. The writing is actually weakest when it comes to Jocelyn, in my opinion. She feels like such an incomplete character because of how back and forth Sam and Abel were in writing her. Like they didn't know or maybe even care enough about who they were / who they wanted her to be. She's written to be an nymphomaniac, a struggling, sensitive girl, a sex symbol, someone that wants to be taken seriously, someone who knows about the industry but also like doesn't know, someone who is a bit childish and irrational, and yet someone who ultimately turns out to be a master manipulator, all at the same time. And it doesn't work, because even when those characteristics don't completely contradict each other, they aren't even fleshed out enough to make sense or be convincing. Overall, Jocelyn's character is disappointing, but she isn't always written terribly, which is also why it's disappointing, because it's a waste of potential. Throughout the series, we learn a little bit more and more about Jocelyn's mother, and while some of it does turn out to not be true, it's very clear that Jocelyn and her mom had a deep and complicated relationship. But instead of learning more about that, which in turn would have made us understand not just Jocelyn, but also her relationships with other characters, instead we have to endure unenjoyable sex scenes between her and The Weeknd that go on for way too long. And my critique, just so we're clear, isn't that there are sex scenes. I don't have an issue with sex scenes when they're good. The issue with sex scenes in The Idol is that most of the time they serve no purpose. Sometimes they're cringy to the point of being unbearable, and most of the time it's displaying a very toxic and unhealthy relationship with sex, and just unhealthy sex in general, which I could argue wouldn't even be an issue necessarily if they served a point narratively, but they don't in the show. It's really just there for shock value, to like push limits or whatever. And while on the topic, I do want to say that I think the conversation around sex, particularly rougher sex, can be a bit paradoxical, in the sense that if you say, I think sex that's really rough on women or the man's pleasure is unhealthy, that claim can be counterclaimed with the idea that women are people capable of making their own choices and they're allowed to enjoy rougher sex. And since both claims are kind of right and wrong in the same time in different ways, it just kind of is a conversation that goes on without a super clear answer. And I just bring that up because I don't want to be accused of like infantilizing or shaming Jocelyn, because again, she is consenting to these activities and she does enjoy them. But for me, the issue is that while there are 2 women writers on the team, that's 2 out of 7 writers credited for the show, and the 2 main writers were again Sam Levinson and The Weeknd. Sam Levinson, who is known for his demeaning portrayals of women, particularly younger women, and the inappropriate and at times dangerous sexual encounters he makes them go through. And The Weeknd, who is the love interest of the show, so he gets to shape both the show and his character into what he wants. So I don't think we get to say in this scenario that like she could just like rougher sex, why are you trying to speak for her or something, because it's grown men creating a younger, vulnerable character for them to have sex with in the way they get to choose to and display, and the ways that they choose to display it. It's fucking weird. Not even just the ways it's displayed, but the fact that The Weeknd had as much involvement as he did, knowing his role in the show, in my opinion, is weird. And you can't necessarily use the defense of, oh, they're actors, it's not real, because like, yes, obviously I know that, but also The Weeknd isn't an actor. Clearly, I mean, my god, his character and his performance were so fucking bad. It's easily the worst part of the show, other than the writing, obviously. But it's also not a case of they're just acting, because was The Weeknd really acting? Why is my eye so red? It looks kind of red. I don't know why it looks so red. The house in the show is The Weeknd's house. They play The Weeknd's music in the show that The Weeknd helped write. The final scene is shot at his concert. He is credited for the creation and the writing of the show. Kind of borders on self-insert, which I think, given The Weeknd's character and the things he does to people, is again really fucking weird. But that's again opinion. All of this is opinion. Let's all get along, okay? Since we're on the topic of the character Tedros, though, let's talk about him as well as his relationship with Jocelyn. Tedros fucking sucks. He is a pimp and a manipulator that gets off on hurting other people, and that in itself isn't a critique. I think in other circumstances and in a world where the show didn't go the direction it did, he actually would have been a pretty decent antagonist. But there are issues in the writing of the character itself that has issues. The issues have issues. There are issues in the writing of the character. I don't know why I worded it like that in my script. Firstly, his motivations are never clear or consistent. You might have noticed that's kind of the buzzword of today, just because of how shitty and inconsistent the show is. Tedros is a club owner, but his main job, I guess, is to be this kind of pimp / cult leader. He will find these younger talents that are down on their luck, and he uses his money and literal psychological warfare to make them rely on him and see see him as this like all-knowing, almost like a god. But why? The obvious answer you might think would be to make money off of them, but he never really does that. He has this ragtag team of singers in his roster, and he swears to them that he is going to make them stars. But it's implied, at least in my opinion, that he was never actually going to let them leave his nest, because if he was planning on it, he would have done it by now. But if he did let their talents get seen by the world, he wouldn't have as much power over them, which I think is why he keeps them basically as pets living in his club for him to sexually and mentally abuse, while he convinces them it'll help them. But the same can't be said for Jenny Kim's character Diane or Jocelyn, but particularly Diane. Their relationship is really a one-off compared to his others in the show, but it's never really explained why, and it ultimately amounts to nothing, but it's still incorporated enough to make you question what the point even is. Diane is a backup dancer in Jocelyn's music video, and the two of them also have a pretty decent friendship, but it turns out that Diane also knows Tedros and is kind of like his side piece, so she's helping him sabotage Jocelyn's music video so Diane can get noticed by Jocelyn's label. And while Diane's motives make sense because she wants to help Tedros and she also wants to be a star, it only sort of makes sense for Tedros. It makes sense because his plan with Diane is that whenever she gets noticed, Diane is going to connect like the label to Tedros to kind of negotiate on her behalf, and so he can be cut into the deal with Diane and the label. But why Diane? There's never any verbal or even implied feelings towards Diane from Tedros, and she's already kind of established, and by that I mean she's employed, which is more than can be said about Tedros's other talents. But it doesn't make sense for Tedros to simultaneously be using Diane to sabotage Jocelyn's comeback while also helping Jocelyn with her comeback. Ultimately, it's a nothing burger side plot that's only purpose is just to exist, so when the twist happens and Jocelyn is suddenly like manipulative and the bad guy, she can be made to look worse by sabotaging Diane's debut, even though Diane literally didn't even do anything except be under the influence of a psychopath, which makes it even more confusing why Jocelyn would do that to Diane, because she very much knew at that point the kind of person Tedros was and the power that he held over people at the point that she finds out that Diane had feelings for Tedros, because this is like episode 4. But instead of punishing Tedros, Jocelyn punishes Diane because she finds out that Diane likes Tedros and that they were kind of fuck buddies. But even that doesn't make sense given the twist that she was just using Tedros, because if she was just using Tedros, why would she fucking care that a background dancer has a crush on him? Notice how the twist makes everything kind of pointless and or nonsensical? Right, yeah. Let's finally talk more about that twist. The twist is finally revealed in the later half of episode 4 when Jocelyn's character like completely shifts after learning about Tedros using Diane to get Jocelyn to his club, which is how they intertwined in the first place. And so now Jocelyn wants nothing to do with Tedros, and in episode 5 she admits to him and to everyone that she had just been using him as inspiration, but now that the album is ready, she doesn't need him anymore. And then after a 6-week time skip, she gives him an artist pass to see her before and during her concert, and during this time it's revealed that she had actually made up a story about her mom abusing her. More on that later. And then during the concert, she like brings Tedros on stage and announces that they are in fact in love, which is implied to mean that Jocelyn is going to forcefully keep him around and use him as inspiration forever under the guise that they are just like a couple, like a starlight couple. What is it called? That's what celebrities are kind of called, right? They're called like starlights. No, they're not. What the fuck is that? Did I just make that up? No. Did I? Starlet. Starlet. Not Starlight. Starlight's from The Boys. Right? Is that her name? Wait, hold on. Side tangent. That is her name, right? The girl from The Boys? Starlight. No? Yes, I'm right. See, nothing. The only things in my brain are media references. If it's not what I'm talking about, it's something else. Something else I'm thinking about. Anyway, so that's the twist, right? I have explained to you the twist. So none of that makes sense. Literally not a single part of anything I just said makes sense in the story, to the point where, as I mentioned earlier, episodes 4 and 5 are so bad to the point that they're almost incomprehensible if you were actually trying to pay attention to the show. And it also makes things mentioned in previous episodes also not make sense. For example, the twist leaves several unanswered questions when it comes to Jocelyn and Troye Sivan's character, Xander. Xander is Jocelyn's creative director and also longtime friend, but their relationship takes a turn when a lot of information is revealed. It really comes out of nowhere. It feels like the writers threw it in last minute because they realized the twist was coming coming way out of left field in comparison to the narrative they had been creating the entire show. But let me set the scene. So in the earlier half of episode 4, Tedros overhears Xander singing and is like, whoa, you're good at singing. Duh, he made Blue Neighborhood, put some respect on it. But he's also like, wait, you're a good singer. You're good enough to like actually do it and like actually sing. And Xander's like, I can't do that. I ripped my vocal cords. And Tedros is like, but I just heard you sing, so you can sing. And Xander's like, that's crazy. What? And then they just start talking about something else. And then later in the episode, for reasons that are kind of never explained because they don't exist, Tedros makes his groupies, trigger warning by the way, oh my god, Tedros makes some of his groupies tie up Xander and put a shock collar on him. And then Tedros questions Xander about his relationship with Jocelyn, why he doesn't sing, stuff with Jocelyn's mom. There's something in my eye and it's really distracting. Hold on. What the fuck? I can't see it. I need a real mirror. Good thing I have my makeup box right next to me. Oh my god, I see it. I have like 3 of Casper's hairs. Oh my god, I got it. Oh my god, that feels so good. I had 2 Casper hairs stuck in my eyelashes. Oh, okay. So anyway, a lot of this again just comes out of fucking nowhere. There's genuinely not a scene explaining how we get from point A to point B. But Xander is accused of using Jocelyn, an accusation that has literally zero basis. And based on what we do know, it makes no sense because we also find out that Jocelyn's mom, who was homophobic and outed Xander, which is actually why he had to live with Jocelyn when they were younger, also made him sign an NDA that he could never start a singing career. So if he's literally legally bound to never pursue music, what could he be using her for? What threat does he have against her? And Jocelyn is going with everything Tedros is saying, so she's like, yeah, you have been using me. Which, if you felt like that was true, for one, you've had since he was 14, because that's how long he's been living with Jocelyn. You've had since he was 14 to tell him to get his own apartment. It also makes no sense for you to let him live in your house and to give him a kind of decent, important job title if you felt like he was using you. She also says that the story about the NDA isn't true, even though for one, she wasn't there. And Xander also literally says that part of it was that Jocelyn couldn't know about it. And y'all, I might sound like I'm getting off track, okay? I know that all of this was to explain how the plot twist doesn't work, and I'm still doing that. But to do that, we also need to go another layer deeper because we also need to talk about Jocelyn's mom again, since she's being brought up again, and it's important. So throughout the show, like through episodes mostly 3 through 5, Jocelyn has been selling this story that her mom was abusive and would beat her with a hairbrush for literally anything. And this apparently went on as long as her mom was like strong enough to hold a hairbrush, because her mom passed away of cancer. So at some point she got too weak. And in episode 3, there's a dinner scene and Tedros asks Xander about this abuse, and Xander is talking about it like he remembers it and like he was there. But if that story is fake, like it's implied to be, was Xander just lying for the sake of it? And if he was, why wouldn't he have said anything about that to Tedros in the scene where Tedros is torturing him? Because during that, Xander is telling Tedros like, she's playing you, you think you're in control, but you're not. Would that not have been a perfect opportunity to say, hey Jocelyn, why have you been lying about your mom abusing you? What's up with that? And I need to change my camera battery. But also, oh my god, speaking about the hairbrush, there's also a lack of consistency there, because in the end of episode 5, when Tedros and Jocelyn are reunited and they're talking in her dressing room, he picks up the hairbrush and is like, isn't this the brush your mom used to beat you with? And Jocelyn's like, that's what I said. Yeah, I said that was that. I said that was that. Yeah, okay. That's what I said. Okay, she's like, yeah, I told you that, yes. But Tedros is like, this hairbrush is brand new. And Jocelyn's like, that's how it's revealed that that story is like fake. But Tedros literally held that hairbrush before because he also beat her with it in episode 3. Didn't even talk about that. I don't even know if I want to talk about that because, oh my god, it's so out of pocket and horrific and just I can't get into that because I'm like, I keep going into little rabbit holes and complaints. Okay, I need to stay on topic. Anyway, not only, since Tedros has already held that brush before, not only would he have noticed that in episode 3, but it wouldn't even look brand new at the time he realizes that it's apparently a brand new brush because he had beaten her with it. So not only would he have realized at the point that he first picked it up that it wasn't brand new, it wouldn't even look brand new because he had beaten her with it and it was several months old at that point. Notice how the more I describe a scene, the more I have to go, but wait, there's more. That can't work because XYZ. I could do that for basically any scene in the show, but I could do it for probably every scene of episodes 3 through 5. 4 through 5, oh my god, I can't. It's so bad. But I think y'all get it. I think y'all get the fact that I find the writing to be inconsistent. I find the characters to lack depth and motivation and not even be convincing as real people. You get that. So I don't want to talk about that anymore. Trust me, I could. I really could. There are several scenes I haven't even gotten into from my notes that I took because you guys get the point. So, moving on to some smaller rants before I come to my conclusion. The cinematography. First of all, the cinematography is also something I wasn't a huge fan of. There are 3 cinematographers credited for the show, and I don't know what their creative vision was, but it looks like a bit of a mess sometimes. And now, granted, this is probably more of a personal grievance than anything else, so take it with a grain of salt. But I cannot stand whenever a cinematographer intentionally shakes the camera to give it more of a natural look, because you can have a camera like on a rig, on a, tripod, whatever setup you have it on, and it still gets the shots. You can move it like left to right, but it's stagnant and overall a very steady shot. But you can also hold the camera and act as the tripod. So the camera itself isn't moving too much, but the person holding it is, so there are some slow, subtle movements as the person just balances and breathes. It's a very subtle touch that can add a lot of impact depending on the scene. But something that I hate is when people shoot handheld, but they exaggerate their natural movements to make those subtle little things that can sometimes even go unnoticed, like making them more noticeable intentionally. And I don't know why I hate it so much, but I think there's just something so irksome and amateur, in my opinion, trying to replicate something in an attempt to create more impact or authenticity, because what you're doing naturally isn't impactful enough, if that makes sense. That might be too specific of a complaint though. Also, I have something in my fucking eye again. But anyway, there are a lot of scenes like that in The Idol where the cameraman is just simply doing too much and the scene doesn't even call for it. Granted, I do think the scenes were trying to call for it because they mostly happen whenever there's an emphasis on Tedros and his nasty ass behavior, but the scenes themselves just lack impact, so the overall execution of the whole thing just kind of falls flat. There are also things like the scene in episode 3 where Tedros is threatening this guy that works at Prada that actually could have been so much better if they had different direction and cinematography, because this scene is another one where the camera is unnecessarily close and unnecessarily shaky, which I do think had a purpose to show, Tedros's instability and volatility, but it could have been shot so differently, and I think it would have made the scene watchable. Not even amazing, just watchable, because the original scene is so embarrassing, gives me such bad secondhand embarrassment. You're not just watching this pathetic man try to look and be intimidating, but directionally, they're also trying to make him look intimidating when The Weeknd simply is not an intimidating man. Something I put in my notes when I was watching the show is that, in my opinion, the scene could have been more impactful maybe if they hadn't tried to do that forced handheld shit and instead just did a steady cam that, instead of shaking, slowly pans inward as Tedros gets more angry at this sales associate, and the camera itself is angled in a way that also adds to Abel's height, since he is significantly shorter than the person he's talking to, which is not the fault of the cinematographer, but it's something that they could have seen and worked with. But that's just one example, and it's not necessarily a huge critique, just something I've noticed. The cinematography really isn't horrible all throughout the show. For the most part, there's nothing to say about it, which for this show is a good thing. And there are a few times where it actually looks good. They play with symmetry a lot in establishing shots, and I think it looks pretty good. Also, the scene whenever Tedros is creeping on Xander when listening to him singing, the lighting and music and cinematography, they all just work together really well, and it genuinely was a good shot. I was like, oh, that's pretty good. And speaking of good things, the best part of this show, without a doubt, is Leia. Leia, I mentioned at the beginning of the video, she is Jocelyn's assistant and best friend, and it wouldn't surprise me if she was simply something that was just left behind from the previous director's version, because she is an actual fleshed out and realistic woman character, and it makes you wonder how the writers created her the way they did when they created everyone else the way they did. you know? Leia is reserved, she's a voice of reason, she genuinely cares about Jocelyn. Her responses to Tedros both directly and indirectly feel very real, as do her interactions with her love interest and the other people on Jocelyn's management team. She's by far the most realistic character and one that I wanted to see succeed the most, and the actress Rachel Sennott did a really good job. And while we are talking about good parts of the show, I cannot not mention Jenny Kim. Baby girl, you crushed your 7 minutes of screen time, and I love you for that. I literally tweeted, I was like watching The Idol, knowing Jenny's only gonna be in 7 minutes of it. Look at Jenny, camera, look at Jenny. But that's actually all the positive things I have to say about the show. So to conclude, The Idol makes several attempts at profoundness that ultimately fail, in part because of the lack of technical and creative skill, and in part because it's ultimately paradoxical for those who made the show to make such a show while trying to give the message that they were trying to give it. What I mean is that when you, as a man in Hollywood with a history for displaying young girls being exploited and sexually abused, try to make a show about a young, sexy pop star being used by her label, it doesn't come off as commentary on the state of the music industry. It comes off as Sam Levinson doing what Sam Levinson does, which is creating young characters to use at his disposal and using his excuses of pushing limits and showing reality to display and further normalize the situations his younger female characters experience. Okay, that's crazy. The twist of Jocelyn's character being in control and being the mastermind doesn't come off as girl power or satisfying or even sensical. It shows that Sam and Abel can create and display a deeply troubled girl being abused by an older man just to try and make her out to be the villain, which as a concept also ultimately fails, as do the majority of the ideas in this show. And to read the final thing that I wrote in my notes as I was watching the show, quote, "This is the stupidest shit I think I've ever seen in my fucking life," end quote. So that was The Idol. It is not a satisfying watch. I can't recommend you watching it, but I can understand if this might have like piqued your curiosity, because again, I'm not sure if I can even show most of the things that I'm talking about. So I can understand you wanting to be interested, but like I really don't recommend it, and it can also be very triggering. So yeah, that was The Idol, and those were my opinions on The Idol, more importantly. If you agree with my opinions, first of all, thank you. Secondly, give this video a like, and also maybe comment and be like, I agree with your opinions. And if you disagree with my opinions, that's also fine. And if you feel the need, you can also say that you disagree with them and give your opinion, as long as you do it respectfully. Please stop being mean to me. I'm a little tired. But that's all I wanted to say. So again, if you like this video, like the video and comment on it. And thank you. Thank you for watching. Bye.